So welcome to Thursdays at 4. We hope that we're done before the weather gets too dreadful. If you have to leave early to pick up a child at daycare, it is at 4:30. That does not constitute rude behavior. Leaving to pick up a child or leaving to pick up anyone is not rude behavior. I was actually addressing someone in particular there and asked if it would be all right. So it's very delightful to introduce Emily Johnson. She is a fellow at the IAS for this year. The fellowship is funded by the Doris Duke Residency to Build Demand for the Arts, and it was a proposal that was jointly written by the IAS and by Northrop. And so when we need examples of creative collaborations that we do, we always use Emily as one of the examples. If you do not have one of these, a little mini flyer, raise your hand. There are many of them available. Emily will be performing Saturday, June 14th to Sunday, June 22nd. Times and locations vary, but this will whet your interest into showing up. So Emily Johnson is an artist and writer who makes body-based work. Since 1998, she's created work that considers the experience of sensing and seeing performance. Her dances function as installations, engaging audiences within and through a space and environment, sights, sounds, smells. And I don't know, if you've looked around, you can probably see that there are props here that are not usual kinds of things at IAS talks. And her dances interact with a place's architecture, history, and role in community. She works to blur distinctions between performance and daily life, to create work that reveals and respects multiple perspectives. Emily has received lots of awards. She received a 2012 Bessie Award for an outstanding production for her work, The Thank You Bar, at New York Live Arts. The Thank You Bar was also performed here. She's been fellow, has had residency at lots of places. Her trilogy of works, The Thank You Bar, Niicugni, and Shore is the project she's going to be talking about today, is supported by National Dance Project and MANCC. The Thank You Bar was performed over 70 times from 2009 to 11. Shore is the third of the trilogy and is commissioned by Northrop Presents and New York Live Arts, and it will premiere in June, and this is the flyer for it. So without further ado, Emily, it's all yours.
Thank you. So I do have a few different things that I'll share with you, words and otherwise, but first is a little bribe, not really bribe, but something to share. It's food. This is, you can just pass it around if you'd like. If you don't like meat, then don't take any. This is moose meat. It's moose that my dad hunted. I'm from Alaska. So he hunts moose every year and hopefully gets them. And then we eat it in all forms. And this is like a little pepperoni stick made out of moose meat. So feel free if you'd like to take a piece. So I am Emily. It's great that you are all here. I'm a choreographer, and I make performance installations. And my ongoing